Hey guys, and welcome back to the Phoenix Guide to Dungeon Runs. Kaz again, and we're on our third dungeon in the Shadowlands. Just a reminder that these are in beta and could change on release. Let's go on a walk. Today we'll be looking at the Necrotic Wake, an attempted Maldraxxan foothold in the realm of Bastion. 4 bosses and a floating citadel await us. Each boss here also has quite a few abilities, so bear with me. Let's bring down the baddies. First on our list is Blightbone, a sewn together monstrosity of rotting flesh and eager bloodlust. Blightbone is a fairly straightforward fight as bosses go, with only a few mechanics to watch out for. Tanks will want to watch for an ability called Crunch, as it does a good bit of damage and is cast quite frequently. Any sort of mitigation works here like Shield Block or the Absorb from Deathstrike. Heaving Wretch is another ability to watch. It spews acid in a cone in front of the boss after facing a random player. The damage up front isn't terrible, but it does leave a 12-second dot, as well as summon Carrion Worms, which lead us to the next mechanic. Carrion Worms cast a single spell, Blood Gorge. It absorbs health from a player and increases the worm's size. After 3 casts, the worms will explode and deal a large dot damage to nearby players. Dealing with the Carrion Worms is quite easy, as all you have to do is have your DPS turn and nuke them down before they can explode. An ability not seen in the video is Fetid Gas, which is a cloud the boss drops onto players that pacifies and silences anyone inside. All you really have to do is step to the side and you're completely safe. After Blightbone, you'll deal with several ad pulls on your way to the next boss. Keep an eye out for any clickable weapons on the ground, notably the Kyrian Hammer and Spear. The hammer works like Stormbolt, stunning the target for several seconds as well as dealing massive damage, while the spear is thrown directly in front of you upon casting and deals a hefty amount of damage as well as increasing damage taken by the target for several seconds. Once you've made your way through the trash, you'll come face to face with Amarth, the Harvester. Amarth and his mount, Bonefang, have several abilities that you'll need to watch out for. Shortly after pulling and throughout the fight, Bonefang casts Unholy Frenzy, which is a small enrage, increasing attack speed by 50% for several seconds. Healers will need to watch your tanks here and make sure you're keeping an eye on personals. Land of the Dead is the big ability here, which summons skeletal minions the tank will need to pick up while the DPS target them down quickly. Shortly after summoning them, Amarth will cast Final Harvest, which destroys the minions and deals heavy damage to players if they are still alive. A couple abilities you might not see in the video are Frostbolt Volley, which is something the party will want to keep interrupting throughout the fight to keep group damage to a minimum, while the other is Necrotic Breath, which is a cone ability that Bonefang casts that deals large shadow damage to players every half second that you are inside, while also reducing healing received by 50%. After a few trash pulls, you'll finally come face to face with the third boss, Surgeon Stitchflesh, who has several abilities that sound kinda complicated, but he's actually fairly easy to handle. Stitchflesh himself sits on a small area out of reach of players, surrounded by a cloud of damaging poison. He summons creatures to terrorize the party. These creations have 3 abilities, while Stitchflesh himself has some of his own while displaced. Stitch Needle will be one of the first abilities seen, and is a thrown attack at a random player that inflicts a light bleed damage that ticks every second for 10 seconds. Embalming Ichor is another ability thrown here by the boss, which throws a poison vial at a random player and leaves a pool of ticking damage where it landed. Simply watch out for the swirl and you'll be completely fine. Now, as for the creations, Festering Rot is a buff cast on the creation that increases its damage done and inflicts a small amount of constant plague damage to players every 3 seconds. This effect stacks, so healers will want to start watching group heals here. Mutilate is a lot like Crunch from the first boss, dealing very heavy damage to the target. Tanks will definitely want to watch their mitigation and personals here for this. The creation's third ability, Meathook, is the big one here. It targets a random player, winds up a hook to grab them, and grips them in. The way to utilize this mechanic is to stand between the creation and the platform the boss is on, and move just before the cast finishes to grip the boss down and bring him into the fight. While the boss is on the ground, you'll want to very quickly clean up any creations and then focus him down with cooldowns and time warp. Something to note here, Stitch Needle instead hits every player while the boss is on the ground, so healers will definitely want to keep an eye on the group here. Stitchflesh will periodically cast Morbid Fixation on a random player and chase them down with 100% increased damage but 50% reduced movement speed. Targeted players will want to either pop a personal and soak some heals, or run away and let everyone else blow up the boss for them. An ability to watch for here is Sever Flesh, which is a really hard hitting ability the boss will randomly cast throughout the fight at his current target. Something worth noting here is if you don't down the boss, he will escape, jumping back to the platform and causing the fight to essentially restart, requiring you to Meathook him back down to the floor and hopefully finish him off. After Stitchflesh, you'll wish you hadn't popped your cooldowns because you'll immediately be taken to the final boss, now Thrallbinder, the leader behind the attack on Bastion. Tanks will want to watch for Icy Shard, a cast that cannot be interrupted and hits fairly hard and quite frequently. Comet Storm targets players' locations every half second for 4 seconds. Watch the swirls beneath your feet as they follow you during the cast, and make sure not to run over other players. Getting hit also increases your damage taken by future Comet Storms by 25%, so really watch out here. Next up, Frozen Binds. This targets a random player and immobilizes them, as well as applying a small dot for 12 seconds. Once it expires, it will spread to any player within 16 yards, but you're in luck, because the effect will be noticed by a large blue ring that unaffected players will definitely need to avoid. Thirdly, Dark Exile is another ability the boss will cast at random players, banishing them to the lower levels of the necropolis. The goal here is to watch out for blizzards and comet storms while trying to escape and destroying Zolrama's siphoners along your way. Everything inside the necropolis slows your movement speed by insane amounts, because if you're down here for more than 50 seconds, you'll meet a very sudden end. Our last ability is Icebound Aegis, which is an instant shield the boss applies to himself that prevents the next chunk of damage taken. While active, the shield also radiates frost damage to all players, so you really want to make sure you get this down as quickly as possible, while healers keep an eye on the party. Once you have defeated the boss and laid waste to the necropolis, celebrate your victory and spoils before jumping into the next dungeon. Again, these are currently in beta and could change. Good luck, and happy hunting!